Hello, and welcome to the Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. This podcast is designed to provide that momentum in our God-given roles of leadership as we partner together to equip today's Christian leaders for tomorrow's opportunities. Thank you so much, and we hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. I'm super excited today because honestly, for some of our listeners today, for a portion, a small selection maybe of our listeners, this will be interesting because we have with us today the host of another podcast.
That's true.
That maybe a lot of you listen to. What is that podcast?
That podcast is called Mixed Messages. So thanks for joining us today for another episode of Mixed Messages with Eric Miller.
There you go.
My name is Joe Caruso.
There you go.
And I'll be your guest as we dig into today's topic.
So good. I love it. So we have many people right now are like, I know that voice. How do I know that voice? This is Joe Caruso, who is the host of Mixed Messages with Jeff Bogue.
Yeah, which is super fun.
But that's not like your real job.
No, I mean,
you're the lead pastor of Give It Away.
Yeah, here at Grace.
What's it? What is the it?
Yeah.
What are you giving away?
Gosh, there's so much about what I do that has so many question marks. Can this be a counseling session?
Are you the children's director?
Great.
Are you giving away germs? Like, what are you?
That would be easier. No, so yeah, it is. So here at Grace, we have a thing. It's called Know It, Live It, Give It Away. It's kind of what we say is our whole emphasis of what we're trying to do. It is the story of Jesus or the gospel. And so we want to live that out. We want to know that and be closer and closer to him. And then we want to give it away. And so giving it away is really encapsulated in the two-pronged approach of like, how do we share the story of Jesus with people that don't yet know it? And also, how do we like bring the kingdom to bear? So if we're seeking and saving the lost, if we're, going after those that need the doctor, like Jesus said, like give it away falls into a lot of that. And so I get to help lead that stuff. I
love it. I love it because not only are you crazy good at your job, I'll just be honest, and I'll brag on you for you, but I have learned over the years, Joe, how incredibly gifted you are in just about everything. So much so that yesterday at our all-staff meeting, he got up, like Jeff Bogue, who's the pastor of Grace Church and the president of Momentum. So we're like stepbrothers.
Yep. Absolutely. I like that.
Jeff is like leading this devotion, and then he looks at you and he says, how are you going to wrap this up? And you like went up on stage and picked up the guitar, which I've never seen or known in the 3 years that I've known you. I did not know that you played the guitar.
Yeah.
And you like picked up the guitar, and I'm like, Joe's such a jokester. Ha, this is hilarious. Ezra's going to come up here next. Like the worship pastor's going to come up next, right? Like Joe's being funny.
Yeah.
And then you like started, like Jeff walked off the stage and you started playing the guitar and singing. And it took me until about the chorus where I was like, whoa, what is happening right now? It blew my mind.
It feels like a lifetime ago now, but leading worship is actually how I first got involved in ministry by stacking chairs. I mean, that's kind of like the way in the pretty much all things ministry. But the first like formal position I ever had was leading worship for our Fellowship of Christian Athletes group at college.
That's awesome.
And then I did that for a long time with the church that I was in youth ministry at for 3 or 4 years. I led worship at that church for probably every other week for a long time. And then I even did it here at Grace for a while. So early on in my tenure here, whenever Ezra Wimberly wasn't on stage, I would step in and lead worship here for a while. But it's been the better part of 12 years since I've done that regularly. So it's been a minute.
Oh, I love it.
Crazy.
It was great. I literally was bragging last night at our life group, and some people in our life group knew you from like high school, and they were, shout out to Tyler Smith and others, but yeah, they were like, yeah, Joe used to actually like be a really good singer and like had mutton chops and all.
Oh yeah,
like
I did
toured
for a while.
They were like telling dirt on you that I had no idea. So that's not why we had you on the podcast today.
Good. I'm really glad to hear that, Eric.
Oh man. So as the lead pastor of Give It Away, one of the things that you've kind of learned and become proficient at is just this concept of like, how do we make Jesus make sense, but then be able to like articulate to other people in a point of need and have an impact in their life. And so part of what you guys do with Mixed Messages that's so cool is you're helping give people a verbiage and a context, and how do we communicate the gospel in a way that makes sense to people, where we're not like getting in arguments over things of our faith, or we're not like trying to cram Jesus down people's throats, but we can communicate, articulate in a way that's important.
Absolutely. That is one of my greatest passions, actually, is just what you said. Our default is to continue to polarize. And what that is, it's a difference between tribalism and community. I actually just heard a great podcast by John Mark Comer where he talked a lot about that difference, and it was pretty fascinating. But like tribalism leads to like exclusion, where like we build walls between people, whereas community works at like tearing down those walls to figure out how can we relate with one another. And so, if Jesus is praying for unity, and obviously we know that he came to like tear down the separation between us and God and restore that and heal us so that we could have that relationship, then we should be trying to follow in those footsteps. How can we then communicate and interact with others in a way that brings us together and not tears us apart? So there's a few phrases that always float around in my head when I think that. And one is like, do we want to be correct or do we want to connect? And I'm not at all like de-emphasizing truth.
Right.
It's not about, well, I don't have to be correct, or are you saying you don't have to be right about who Jesus is? I'm saying we don't have a platform with people if we're just trying to kind of shut them down.
Yep.
When's the last time you had a conversation that was productive and healthy where it started with them accusing you that you were wrong? It like doesn't happen, And so if we're going to throw those types of bombs right away, then we're not going to get anywhere. And that happens with things of faith. It happens with politics. It happens with cultural issues. It happens with sports. I mean, like the moment, I'm born and raised here in the Akron, Ohio area. So like most of us in this area, I'm an Ohio State fan. So if someone approaches me and says, I'm a Michigan fan, I'm mature. I don't mean this as a joke. I'm mature enough to get past that, but I have the momentary struggle of like, you're a Michigan fan.
Yeah.
Like, and it technically means nothing in terms of the value of the person that you are.
Right.
But we're so pre-wired to create those divisions that it just messes with our ability to relate with people. So one of my greatest passions is how can we find the Jesus pathway forward and not land in one of our polarizations?
Yeah. There's probably a lot of people who just turned this podcast episode off because you said you were an Ohio State fan.
That's true.
So it cuts both ways.
And that is 100%. Like I realize
that's exactly true to your point.
Because in the same way that I got tired of seeing Alabama and Clemson in the playoffs every year, I'm like, I know that there are plenty of people like, Ohio State again, seriously? Like, so yeah, I totally get that.
Yep. Yeah. So you brought up the phrases. You used that word.
I did.
We're going to talk about a phrase today that's kind of like a hot topic, maybe.
Okay.
A little bit. But before we dive into that, like Joe, we were just talking about like what are some of the phrases? I like that though. Am I trying to be correct or connect? That's a good one. What are other phrases that you find yourself using a lot? And as you think about that, I'll tell on myself.
Sure.
Because I told you a minute ago, my wife. She reminds me or teases me, I guess, all the time that I go through phrases or phases of phrases, right? So when she points them out, then I stop saying them because I don't like getting caught. I get stuck in repeat mode, right? So one of mine for a long time was for real. Like when people would say something like shocking, no, for real? And that was like a big one. I said it so much that I didn't even realize I was saying it.
Yeah.
That like when people gave me good news or told me something, I would, for real?
That's awesome.
And apparently I had like a tone and a pitch to it and my voice would raise.
For real?
She pointed it out and I was like, for real? Do I really? She's like, you just did it.
No one has ever been so kind to me as to name my waves of phrases, but I like that, phases of phrases. I think I have a version of that too. I used to say literally all the time, and not literally. Like I know what the word is. I would say literally. I'm blanking on his name still, but like the guy from Parks and Rec. That's how he says it. Like literally, this is the best podcast I've ever been on.
Yeah.
And then, but right now, two of my filler phrases. I start a lot of sentences with ironically, which is ridiculous because I don't ironically speak very often. So like, I'll even catch myself like, no, I don't mean that. Like, why did I say ironically? I'll say that out loud. Like, and another one is if I'm in a meeting with a group of people, especially people that I meet with regularly, they know toward the end of a meeting, if I say, all right, that was Joe code for we're done.
We're done. Yeah.
All right. They'll like literally get up and start like packing up, and they're always correct. Like I said the all right that actually makes sense.
So you have to be careful not to say that in the middle of the meeting when somebody says something, because then your team will get up and leave and everybody else is like, why are they
Yeah. I mean,
why are they leaving?
Like almost legit. It's kind of crazy. But then there's two phrases that I like I bring up all of the time. One of them I totally grabbed from another leader here in our Akron area, and it's really messed with me. They call him Bishop Joey, and he says relationships move at the speed of trust, and that has rocked my world. And it's a simple way to kind of even harkens back to what we just talked about why is it so important to work with people instead of just trying to be correct all the time?
Yeah.
But like, we're not going to be able to trust people or build relationships with people unless those things move at the same speed.
Yep.
And so like, there's a reason we don't trust the random person on the internet when they post their opinion. And there's a reason that we tend to trust those closest to us, and we can be even altered a little bit by what they think, even when we're like, I'm pretty sure that's not true.
Yeah.
But I like this person. I know this person. I trust this person. So like those two things are super related. And then the other one that honestly brings me a lot of sanity is this phrase that no one will ever do what you want them to do the way that you want them to do it ever. That is life-changing. Like,
that's a good parenting hack.
It is a huge parenting hack. Like
we may have to
it's a
revisit
marriage
this
hack.
for another episode.
I mean, like, no
Yes.
one will ever do what you want them to do the way that you want them to do it, ever. So if you get to lead a team, or you're a boss, or you're a pastor that oversees a group of people, like, no one's ever going to do it the way you want them to do it. Even if, now, sometimes that's bad. Like, gosh, they never do it up to my standard. Sometimes that's excellent because they do it different and they do it better. Like, so it's not always a negative thing. One of the ways this really gives me sanity too is I get to do a lot of this stuff. I do it full time. I'm in ministry all the time. Most of our volunteers, it's their 2 hour a week thing. It's their 1 hour a week thing.
Yeah.
And so they don't get to near the focus in this area of life as much as we do. And so of course they might not be able to do it as well or efficiently as maybe one of us could. But I would probably rather spend time building into 10 people to do something at 10% than me just have to do everything at 100%.
Yep.
And realize that no one's going to do it the way I want them to do it ever. And that's probably going to help in the long run because they'll connect with different people. They might do it better than I am. Like, there's just so many reasons why that's healthy. But at the core of it, at least for me, it also gives me so much sanity.
Yeah,
because there's no way for them to
good.
do it.
I just wrote that down so I can remember it. Yeah, that's good. Joe, I think maybe this is true for you. Correct me if I'm wrong. There are certain phrases that like trigger me that
sure.
I don't like. The one that like for a decade or more has been a pet peeve of mine is "it is what it is."
Oh yeah.
And people will say that when they feel like there's nothing that they can do about it. And so in my student ministry, I kind of adapted that. That was big years ago, and so I started telling my students, "It is what you make it."
Yeah.
And I'm like, you get to decide. You have a choice.
Yes.
If you come to church expecting to learn and get something out of you will almost every single time. And if you come to church like, well, Eric's an idiot and he's not going to share anything. If you come to youth group or a church with that's your mindset, you're probably actually you're not going to get anything out. It's not what it is. It's what you make. Like that, I could get on a soapbox.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe that's another episode, but
maybe I could probably join you on that one. That one,
yeah.
I can't stand that one.
So this phrase that we're going to talk about today is quickly becoming one of those for me.
Okay.
And those of you who've clicked on this and listening, you know what it is because we made it our title: Thoughts and Prayers. What this has become, and Joe, even in doing my homework for this conversation, you do a quick Google search of the phrase "thoughts and prayers," and you'll see memes and GIFs and all kinds of things making fun of people who say this phrase.
Yep.
And yet, I want to read this because I looked it up. I typed in Google, Why do people say thoughts and prayers? And here is the very first thing that came up.
I'm actually curious.
The phrase thoughts and prayers is often used by officials and celebrities in the United States as a condolence after a tragic event such as a deadly natural disaster or mass shooting.
Wow. Yeah.
That's what this has become.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, for you and I, we know that like when we say to people like, hey, thoughts and prayers go. For me, I genuinely mean like I'm going to pray for you.
Sure.
But in our culture today, this phrase that's not what that means anymore.
Yep.
So as you're like lead pastor of Give It Away, you're helping make sense of things. Let's dive into this topic. How do we make sense of this today? We see this all throughout our culture.
All the time.
A good example, when we were brainstorming about you coming on this episode, the thing that like recently happened in our culture was this Damar Hamlin, a safety for the Buffalo Bills, got injured in a game against the Bengals. He went unconscious on the field. He got resuscitated. They took him to the hospital, and this like response across the country was like our thoughts and prayers. I literally saw on like Instagram a meme that was like the truck of thoughts and prayers just arrived in Cincinnati, and it's like an empty truck, right? Like that was the meme. Like people are making fun of people saying thoughts and prayers. And so then it like leads to this, well, I got to do something. And so people started giving millions of dollars to his charity because it's our human DNA. It's our response to like, we want to do something. And so now I guess we say thoughts and prayers, and that's what we do. Like,
right.
So that I don't actually have to pray for you, so that I can get out of this awkward conversation, so that I don't know, like, let's dive in. Like, what are your thoughts? How does that all strike you? What do you do with that?
Yeah, it's there's a behind the scenes principle to this that we don't like to think about how people hear what we say, especially if we if we think that what we're saying is of value, then we have a hard time hearing other people say, I didn't understand fully what you meant. I remember first learning this when I started getting into teaching and preaching. If I would get feedback that was where they were trying to be constructive, I took it so personally and I took it so negatively. I'm like, I worked so hard on this, and it's just the Bible. Like, how could you complain about this or whatever? Right. And like what I learned over the years is like, these are folks that are trying to help me to be understood, so that what I'm so passionate about or what I feel like God's pressing into me somebody can do something with it, as opposed to be confused by it or hurt by it or something worse. Yeah. And so I heard this analogy before I dive into the thoughts and prayers specifically, where it's not an analogy. That's like me saying ironically. So, where it's just this understanding of like the key to communication. And they said, if you can say something that's intelligible and understandable, then you actually only score a 25%. Like, good job. At least it's understandable. If the person can take it and comprehend it and like regurgitate it back to you, you score a 50%. Right? So like, I say thoughts and prayers, they respond back, oh, okay, great. You're thinking about me. You're going to be praying for me.
Thanks.
Yep. That's 50%. Now, if they're going to do something based off of what you've taught, what you've said, now you've gotten to the 75% range. Like, they actually understand that what you're communicating inspires or shows a pathway forward. And if they can then turn that around and reciprocate it, share it to someone else, now you've gotten to the place to where you're at 100% of communication, because they've understood it, they've internalized it, they can do it, and they are responding to it. And now so much so that they're even taking it around. Now, we see that in literal how social media plays out. You can write an intelligible post and it gets 2 likes and no one comments, but you got a 25% because what you said was good. If people start interacting with you a little bit, like, oh, that's a really good point, 50%, then like, I'm going to do something with it. Like, you hear, like, I read your article that really helped me. That was so, I heard your podcast, and you and Joe were so great this, episode, whatever, like, but then like,
don't set the bar too high for this.
When things turn viral,
you're
like, oh, that one connected. And that's when you get like 100%. So thoughts and prayers, I think, get stuck somewhere in that 25% range, and then is limited to go beyond that because of how people hear those words. So if as a fellow believer, if you were going through a really terrible time and all I said to you was, hey man, I'm thinking about you. Mm-hmm. Now, Christian to Christian and leader to leader, you'd be like, are you gonna pray?
For real?
Or what? But you'd probably have some reaction like, what, you're not going to pray about it? Like, you're only thinking of me?
Yes.
Like, Christian to Christian, like, that would feel weird if someone like engaged a tragedy and didn't mention that they were going to pray for it. Because me thinking of you, I mean, let's just be honest, it doesn't do anything. Right? Now, I know that probably 99.9% of our listeners and watchers right now are believers and they understand the power of prayer, but the world doesn't.
Yes.
So when you say something only as simple as thoughts and prayers, what they hear is thinking of you and thinking of you.
Yep.
It doesn't resonate with the power and the action that comes behind what we know prayer to be. Now, some of that is completely my fault by saying something so generic that is understood in a different way.
Yeah.
It's also partly my fault because these are opportunities to like actually pray. And I don't know that it's appropriate every time to like spell out a prayer, especially if this is like a social media post or even when we're texting someone that we care for. But it is an opportunity to think about that. It is an opportunity to call that person up and pray with them. Yeah. Like prayer is meant to be communal. It's meant to go to God together. It's meant that God would change our hearts. And so it's not simply I will make sure that I throw my wish up to the giant genie in the sky. Right. We know that, but do we accidentally operate that way sometimes? So if the culture is hearing, I'm just thinking of you, and they, especially then if they have a negative view of who God is, then it's one more way, unfortunately, that Christians are seen as doing something that doesn't matter, doesn't count, doesn't actually help anybody that's actually in need, and all you're doing is going to your pie in the sky anyway. So maybe our intent is to truly pray, and our secondary intent is to help people see the wonder of Jesus, and we may have done the opposite.
Right.
Simply because that phrase doesn't connect with the unbelieving world the way that we wish it did.
Hey, listeners, thanks for tuning in to today's episode. We have a little bonus clip that we wanted to give you. This past year at Momentum Youth Conference, we did a game in one of our sessions where we had a high school student that was selected as the winner of that game, and their prize was a Momentum Ministry Partners swag bag. So we filled this backpack with all kinds of merch and gear from our Momentum store. And in that bag, we thought it would be super fun if we included an opportunity for me to interview that student as a part of a podcast. So in today's episode, you're going to get to hear just a little clip from Natalie Love, who is a high school student in Hagerstown, Maryland, sharing about her experience at Momentum Youth Conference and her the things that she learned, her favorite speakers, all that. So we hope that you'll enjoy this little bonus feature in today's episode.
Yeah, so I am 14 years old and I'm currently in 9th grade and I'm a freshman at Williamsport High School.
Who was your favorite speaker and why?
That's a hard one. They were all very awesome. I think if I did have to pick a favorite though, it would be Shep, like C.L. Shepherd. I just really liked his message and I liked how he really, for the overall theme of like rewiring your heart.
This was maybe my favorite message that he has given. He did such a good job. And even just his, I don't know if the Holy Spirit put it on his heart or if he had thought to do that ahead of time, but he gave the gospel invitation kind of at the end of the week, and to see all those students go forward and hearing some of the stories even from them of, God had been working on their heart all week, and they decided the last minute, the end of youth conference, to go down and give their lives to the Lord. That just was so cool to see.
Oh, so good. Yeah. So for us, we are put in a position where we get to make a choice, where we can be intentional and we can leverage that as an opportunity to say, even though we may be tempted culturally to say thoughts and prayers, because it's a gesture, it's a kind, it's a condolence, right? But as believers, to take that next step and actually say, oh man, I like to empathize. I get that. Or maybe you don't get it, but that's tough. Like that's a tough spot to be. Can I just pray for you?
Right.
Like that. I think that's such a simple question. And even if you don't go that further step and like pray for them now, because maybe you're standing in the middle of Starbucks or wherever you are and it's not the conducive right time to actually like pray, but can I be praying for you? Like asking that question, the response of them saying, yes, you can. Like I've done this with waitresses before, like, hey, we're going to pray for our meal. Is there anything we can pray for you about?
Yeah.
And it's fascinating the response that they give you.
And prayer is meant to be relational, not transactional.
Yes.
So if we're trying to pray because I need to make sure I get another count of prayer
Check
up to
my
God
box to be a good Christian.
then that's not the goal. Prayer is relational. So like, I want to imagine if you had a close relative that was a doctor and you ran into someone that's like, I have this weird pain and I can't figure it out. And it's like, it's consistent enough that I'm thinking of going to see a doctor about it, but it doesn't hurt that much and I can't tell. And you're like, you know what? Let me go talk to my dad's a doctor. Yep. Let me go talk to him and see if he thinks you should go or not. Now, if we don't go talk to our dad, that was mean.
Right.
It wasn't caring. It was mean.
Every time I see you, like, hey, did you talk to your dad?
And I'm like, oh, no, I forgot, man. You know, like, because it's relational. I actually want to go to my dad to see what he thinks, how he wants to involve himself in this, if at all, how I should be involved in this. Maybe I need to go back to that friend and recommend a course of action or surround them or no, just encourage them or actually just ice it. Like, I need to come back with that. Like, prayer is relational. And so if we're just like, oh, I need to pray real quick about this, like, I'm not saying we can't say quick prayers, but that's not the point. Right. The point is connecting with God on their behalf. And then I think prayer is also horizontally relational. Prayer is one of the fastest ways that you can help someone understand how real God is to you. And so when you pray with them, not only are you kind of subconsciously showing them the importance of God in your life, but you're also introducing them to the concept of what it's like to go to the Father of the universe that you have a relationship with. Because so many people that don't know Christ assume that prayer has to be formal. Right. They assume that it has to be say these words, repeat the Lord's Prayer, that it has to be the wish list or whatever. But when you walk to him and you're like, God, my heart's breaking right now, and you start relationally connecting with God in prayer, you're introducing something to them that they'll maybe never experience otherwise.
Right.
If someone doesn't do this.
Yeah.
And so how is it that we can be kind of faithful to the call of demonstrating who Jesus is in real time? I don't know. I think it's one of the best ways to share Christ is to share our legit relationship with him in real time.
I love that you said that, because I think that that's so true. The times where I've like gone that step and prayed for that person in that moment, like they see that it unites you with them. It's meaningful. Usually they're like, hey, Eric, thanks so much for praying for me. Like, you know, the fact that you just took the time in that moment to like do that. And usually it's something like, you know, the prayer that you prayed was so meaningful, or like they're moved to tears, or like, because it's not about anything magical that I said. No. It's about that heart. It's about that relationship, both with God and with the person. But the other thing that I think is so cool, if we take that one step further, when you see the creator of the universe, our sovereign God who's all powerful and all knowing, interact in that way with those people and in those moments and the things that are heavy to them, and they are healed, or God does reveal an answer, or God does provide in this way, like then they're like, oh my word, Joe prayed for me. That's exactly what he prayed. And then it's like it's making Jesus make sense to them. Like, oh my word. And people who don't have a relationship with Christ, they don't believe in God, I think that gives them pause. I think that causes them to go, wait a second, is this a coincidence? Did Damar Hamlin just like miraculously recover?
Right.
Or was it all of those, quote, thoughts and prayers?
Yeah.
And the people who actually were praying to a living God,
Yep.
which is so cool, because when you see that play out, so even to go back to this Damar Hamlin, we saw this play out.
Yeah, right.
There's a former NFL quarterback, Dan Orlovsky, I think is his name, and he's an ESPN football analyst on live Sports Center or TV, whatever the show was. He said, you know what? We've been hearing this word, thoughts
Yeah,
and prayers,
right.
all day. This was, I think, the very next day.
Mm-hmm.
And he just said, he asked the two co-hosts with him, can we just pray? Did you see this clip?
I did. Yeah,
it was
it's amazing.
fascinating. He's like, can I just pray? And both of them were like, actually, yeah. Yeah, do that. And he said, I don't know if it's the right thing to do. And the one guy was like, it is the right thing. I just thought it was fascinating. And then he prayed.
Which, by the way, is probably going to be how most people react if you suggest the same thing.
Yes.
Most people, if they don't have that type of relationship with Jesus or one at all, like, they're not going to deny the fact that someone's like,
Right.
I've asked so many people in my life, I can't off the top of my head even think of one that denied it. Like, no, please don't pray for me. That'd be, they're all blown away by it. And even if they have the fleeting thought, my guess is those two co-hosts are like, are we allowed to do this? Can we say this on
Probably.
national TV?
Probably.
Are we allowed? I guess, but it'd be weirder to say no. So, okay, sure. Like, they might have those type of thoughts. They're still going to allow the prayer to happen.
Yep.
And that's where our genuineness has to show up, because we have to show them the concern. We have to show them our connection with Jesus. It's not about saying the right thing. It's about the relational connection to the God that is inviting them to have a relationship with them as well. It's arguably life-changing. And we say things like, well, there's the power of prayer, but this is where it shows up.
Yeah. Yeah, Joe, the last question, I know we're going to run out of time here quickly, but I think as leaders, as pastors, as Christ followers, like people who want to have an impact in our culture today, when you actually stop and pray for people, there's power in that. We've been talking about that. But here's, and I'd love for you to kind of expound on this a little bit. I think that that's so unique. How many times in church do we say, in our churches, do we say, I'm going to pray for that? How many times do you take prayer requests in your small group? But how rare is it that then you like go back to that, where the next time you see that person, or like 3 days later, you send them a text message, hey, I literally have been praying. I literally have been praying for you. And I just wanted to check in. How's that going? Like the next time that you see them, the next time that your small group regroups, like, did you write those things down? Or I think so many times in our churches, we're guilty of like moving on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And we're really good at saying, even in church world, at saying, I'll pray for you, the equivalent of thoughts and prayers. And maybe we do pray in that moment, but then we forget about it. And we don't go back, and we don't check in, and we don't follow up. How did that go? Like, what if we actually committed to like praying for that? As a pastor, I'm sure you see this a lot.
I do, yeah.
What does that look like? How do you navigate that?
I want to go back to that idea that prayer is relational and not transactional. Like, maybe some of us just need to simply hear pray in the moment, because we are, bad, if you will, at going back and praying for them, or we forget. So pray in the moment. Again, those are some of the most powerful times. We've done that in our staff meetings over and over and over again, where we will share every once in a while, like, yeah, this person's going through a hard time, but then there's like that one situation where like, this is terrible. And we'll just pause right then and there. Like, we just need to pray for that right now. And we'll figuratively drop to our knees and say, God, can you show up in this area? But prayer, I truly think, is not about did you or didn't you do it. It's about, are you willing to use it to connect? And so that's both with God and with other people. It is less, how can I say this? It is less impactful if we just simply, I just air quoted if you're listening to this, go to God and say, could you help handle this situation? Could you heal my friend? Could you help them through this circumstance? It is more powerful when we use that as relational an investment back into the person that we did just pray that for.
Right.
And so, like, praying for people should connect me not only with God, but with the subject of my prayer. I actually think you go to the Beatitude or the Sermon on the Mount right after the Beatitudes, and Jesus says, "Pray for your enemy."
Yeah.
Like, one of the reasons I truly think practically that he says to do that is because it connects us with the person that we're praying for. So if I have an enemy, you fill in your blank.
Yep.
The the fan of a different team, all the way to the person that's ruined a segment of your family, to the person that's abused you, to the person that's the worst outspoken, against all of your positions, whatever that enemy happens to look like.
Yeah.
I would almost challenge you, spend the week fervently praying for who they are as people, as people that are broken, that don't yet know the Lord, or at least in this area seem to have a disconnect with the ways of Jesus.
Yeah.
And really go to that, because we'll start to see them as that broken vessel. And instead of seeing as an evil enemy, we'll start to realize what pain has this person gone through that this is how they respond to them?
Yep.
What level of blindness might they have that they don't see? God, do I have a spot like this in my life? And suddenly we find ourselves compassionate. Suddenly we find ourselves maybe even relating, but through a different set of circumstances. And now we actually have an evangelistic or a ministry heart toward our enemy, as opposed to, they're just on the other side of whatever coin. And I think that's why Jesus says to pray for them. We need to take that same mindset to even our loved ones that, would you pray for me, or can we pray for you? Because we have such a wonderful opportunity. When we cycle back, you remembered me.
Yep.
You remembered my name.
Right.
You remembered what I was going through. I mean, this stuff speaks volumes and volumes and volumes to people. So are we willing to utilize this wonderful opportunity that God's laid right before us to pray for people, to pray with people, and then to cycle back and go back to the Heavenly Father with the update, with whatever's happening, and allow Him to start spiritually connecting us? It's an underused, miraculous tool that's right in front of us.
Yep. That's such a good reminder, a good challenge. Well, Joe, thank you for being a part of this conversation.
Absolutely.
When we were brainstorming, man, there's this thing. I think it was just I kept seeing thoughts and prayers all over, and it was driving me crazy.
Yeah.
I'm like, there's something here. I started praying about it. I started chewing on it. Our team did as well here at Momentum. So thank you for joining this conversation and giving us your insight.
Yeah.
I feel like you should say all right now.
All right.
There we go.
That's it.
Joe, I love it. Oh, that's fun. Thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in to another episode.
To learn more about Momentum Ministry Partners and our many other resources, please be sure to follow us on social media at Momentum Ministry Partners, or check out our website, www.buildmomentum.org.
Go listen to Mixed Messages with Jeff Bogue.
That's right. Yeah, I'll see you there.
And Joe Caruso.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in.
Well, guys, I think that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. We'd be really honored if you went ahead and subscribed to the podcast, and that way you can just kind of stay up to date with the episodes that we're posting in the future.